At this time, I would bring forward Mike Burke, formerly known as the Magic Man, with our next budget workshop and our wonderful deputy, Heather
I had to
Knust.
relinquish the title, I can't. Let's see. Can you do this? I'll start talking. Okay. Well, good afternoon and happy Cinco de Mayo. The budget development process, as we know, is a journey, and we reached an important milestone last Friday with the legislature approving the state budget for next year. Ms. Knust is going to be taking us through the details in a minute, but just to give you the quick summary, the revenue provided from the state is relatively flat. And you'll notice a slight uptick in funding, but when you consider the rising cost of FRS employer pension contributions, it more than negates that nominal increase. And then the decline in our enrollment remains the major budget driver. We're down about 6,000 students in our district-operated schools, and we're hopeful enrollment will rebound in the fall, but we have no way of knowing if that's going to happen for sure. And we're continuing to reach out and try to re-engage students and families, but we really won't know until we get closer to the start of school if that work's paying off and how many families actually register. Our district, we have reduced staffing as a result of the decline in enrollment. Most of our staffing allocation formulas for our schools hinge on student enrollment, so that has played out as we develop the school budgets. On the department budgets, you may recall last June, we were kind of proactive. We were really concerned about what the pandemic was going to do to our revenue, and we proactively reduced department budgets by 8% at the end of the day, which was significant. And we're currently going through the department budgets again. We'll be meeting, each department head will be meeting with the superintendent starting next week. And we were setting out to try to achieve another 5% in reductions, but I can tell you, I'm not optimistic we're going to get there. We pushed pretty hard last year. We swept out a lot of vacancies. Any low-hanging fruit was kind of harvested. And now I'm seeing really difficult choices that would result in our ability to provide the services expected of departments, and the demands being placed in our departments continue to grow. So I just want to kind of manage expectations going into that. I'm concerned that we cannot go too far with our reductions, or we'll really hamper our ability to meet the needs of the students. We were very fortunate this year with the governor and the commissioner of education being able to hold us harmless and keep our funding intact. And they did that statewide. You may recall the state was down 88,000 students. We recently got the updated calculation from the DOE, and it turns out about 60,000 of the students landed in virtual ed, 50,000 in the state's Florida virtual school, and another 10,000 in a charter virtual school that was based out of Hendry County, but serving students across the state. So that's where a lot of the families flocked to, was to virtual ed. And our own Palm Beach Virtual has expanded this year and will continue to likely grow next year for families that want that online option. The bad news we're going to show you today is our general fund operating budget. Because of the flat funding, because of the decline in enrollment, we are facing a shortfall. But it's too early to panic at this point. The saving grace will be this federal ESSER dollars, the American Rescue Plan. We do have over $500 million for the next 3 years. There were costs that hit your operating budget that were COVID related, and that we can push those costs. The ESSER dollars will help us maintain our ability to open schools and run them safely. The primary challenges will be to spend these dollars to address the unfinished learning, the social emotional needs of our students, which I see as a high priority from the community, and just meet all the needs of our kids going forward for the next 3 years. So it's going to be a little tricky. We're also mindful of the fact that you don't want to rely on non-recurring revenues to address any structural imbalance in your budget. But I think we can manage that. We are achieving some savings this year with our operations not at 100% full capacity, with some students still attending online. And we'll be working through that over the next several weeks, and we'll be back in front of you in June. All right, well, I think my preamble is running a little long here today. but I had a lot to say. I'm going to turn this show over now to our Deputy CFO, Ms. Heather Knust, and let her break it down for us.
Okay, so I'm going to be able to get into a little more detail. We're going to start with an overview of the results of the legislative session, look at the FEFP, the statewide impact, as well as the local impact. You know, I was uncharacteristically optimistic, overly optimistic in the last meeting, thinking that based on the positive economic outlook in the state of Florida, that we were going to see some increases in the initial House and Senate budget proposals. But really, you know, Mr. Burke was right to be skeptical that, you know, we really didn't see an increase in the education budget, and the increases in the revenue really went to other priorities within the state budget. So I'll be able to get into more more detail on that. We really are facing significant budget challenges this year. We're in an environment that is really difficult to navigate because it is new and it is uncharted territory. And so one of the key areas of our budget and how our budget is built, like Mr. Burke just mentioned, is enrollment. And the uncertainty in enrollment really has an impact as to where our budget shortfall is ultimately going to end up. We're also going to give an update on the federal funds, the ESSER dollars that are out there and available. And we're still waiting on additional guidance from DOE. So even though we know the amount we're going to be awarded, we are still waiting for, you know, a significant amount of information from DOE on how to apply for those funds and the timeline of those funds and receipt of those funds. So starting with looking at the highlights at the statewide level of FEFP, the base student allocation, we're seeing an increase of $53 per student. That pretty much is enough to offset the increase in the cost of the FRS. There also was a pretty significant reduction in the class size reduction categorical, and that was based on changes in how the funding and the allocation of each of the grade level spans for the class size calculation. In looking at, there are some positive aspects of looking at the proposal, or looking at the actual approved budget. The RLE was not rolled back, so that's the first time that's happened in many years, although the increase in the assessed value is also not expected to be as much as it was in previous years. The charter school capital outlay was fully funded because that was a question as to whether that was going to happen or not, because that was a difference between the House and Senate proposals. So the charter school capital outlay was fully funded. And then the House went out on the debate of actually mandating some of the ESSER 2 funds as to how those are going to be funded. So that was some difference between the House and the Senate. And ultimately, like I said, the House prevailed, and there are some legislative mandates that we'll get into on those ESSER 2 dollars. So limiting our flexibility as to how those funds can be used. So now getting into more detail, specifically looking at what the impact is in Palm Beach. I know there's a lot of information on the next two slides, so please feel free to stop me as we're going through if you have any questions. Normally when I present this, I just show you the fourth calculation compared to the final calculation. This year I thought it was important to include the second calculation, which is the original projected enrollment, because of the hold harmless. So you could see really how much additional funding we were receiving due to that declining enrollment that we did see this year. So initially, our projected enrollment was 194,000 students, but based on the actual, the fourth calculation, which was based on looking at the actual enrollment in October and February, we ended up at 186,000 students. So that, you know, was a decrease of nearly 8,000 students. Looking at the final conference, as to the projected enrollment for next year, we're going to be up a total of 2,600 students. You can see that the BSA is an increase of the $53. Once you apply our district cost differential, the increase in the BSA in Palm Beach County is $60. And the impact of the increase in FRS is about $50, so that does cover our increase in FRS. In going down, I want you to look at row 16. That's the proration available for state funds is $4.2 million when you look in that fourth calculation. And what that is related to is that we did have a hold harmless this year. So every district was paid at least on what their projected enrollment was. But any district that had an increase in their enrollment over the projected enrollment, that had to be funded that additional amount, and that additional amount that was funded to those other districts was allocated to all the districts across the state. So initially, that original estimate was going to be $1.2 million, based on the actual enrollment coming in after looking at both, looking at what the actual enrollment ended up being after the February count. If that was increased from 1.2 million to 4.2 million for Palm Beach County.
Ms. Knus, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Back on line 1, you said we're down 8,000 students.
We're down 8,000 students when you compare our projected to where we were right now in looking at FY21. So once you compare our actual enrollment right now to compare to where we're projected for FY22, we're going to be up 2,600 students.
So can you translate that then? How many students we're down right now from where we were before the pandemic?
6,000.
So, Mr. Superintendent, do we know where those 6,000 kids are at? Do we still have children out there that are not connected to the district and we haven't found them?
No, so what we've determined is that some kids have left the state, some have left the country, and others have enrolled in charter schools and in our home schools. So the team has been able to track a lot of that. There may be a few kids, but nowhere near the number that we initially thought.
And then we also have started initiatives in order to reach out to those families to bring them back into the school district. And as part of when we get on later into the presentation with the ESSER 2 dollars, that's one of the legislative mandates, is that part of the money is used in order to help to reach out to those students and provide supports in order to try to bring them back into the school district.
Okay, let me just follow up, Mr. Superintendent. So we must have the names of the 6,000 kids that we expected to be there that weren't. So how close are we to figuring out, have we contacted 6,000 families, or how many families out of the 6,000 have we not got in contact with that we don't know where those kids are at?
Yeah, Mike can respond to that. His team was part of that process.
Yep. Mr. Barbieri, we kind of broke down the missing kids into different categories. And the initial concern, there was about 1,300 students that were whereabouts unknown. We didn't know where they were. And under June Issa's leadership, she formed a little group that worked evenings and after hours to make contact with those families. And then, so we've attempted, they kept detailed logs, if they were successful or not and what the issue was, why the student had left or moved out of town. So we've been actively working this. Then we had about 5,600 kids that we were able to show each of our schools, the students that we expected to be at their school, but they were not there. And we shared those lists with our principals, and we provided a small allocation of money and said, we wanted that kind of school-based approach to reach out to the families and say, hey, we want you back, what's going on? Is there anything we can help you, any obstacles you need to overcome to get back in school? And we don't really know the success of that effort yet, but as Ms. Knust was saying, this issue got such attention by the legislature that they carved out $112 million statewide of the ESSER 2 dollars, and they earmarked it. So for Palm Beach, it's $6.1 million. And we are tasked with spending $6.1 million towards the re-engagement already, finding these students, which is quite a bit. It's $1,000 per missing kid. So I think we're gonna have a hard time spending $6 million on re-engagement. But we certainly have the resources there if we need to do additional work over the summer months or in the months ahead, more counselors trying to get in touch with families, what have you, and I'll work with the superintendent and the team there. But the state has put some real money behind this because it was such a concern. Now, what's kind of ironic is, I just told you earlier about 60,000 of those kids were in virtual ed, so they're not necessarily totally missing, It may have been a little bit of an overreaction by the state that earmarked that much money. But we're going to have to work through that, and we certainly have the resources to keep trying.
I think it's important also for the board to understand that when students go to Florida virtual, so we know where they're at, but they just don't count on our rolls. They have essentially separated from the school district. So that's why those numbers look that way. We know that, matter of fact, I don't know if it was Ms. Whitfield or Ms. Ayala, we found some families, because of the language barrier, instead of signing up for our distance learning platforms, they literally went to Florida virtual school, which then unenrolled them from our district. And I think back maybe in August, September, we discovered that some of the charter schools and some of the virtual schools did not let us know that the kids enrolled on their end. So in a typical year, if you enroll in another school, they contact us to get the information. But this year, people were just hoarding the kids and didn't even let us know. So we kind of know all those pieces, but to the point, the schools really, and wherever June is in the room, her and her team worked late hours trying to re-engage with those kids.
They had a lot of success. And the other part that was the missing kids are just the families that never entered our system, that had maybe a kindergartner that would have been ready for kindergarten at the last fall, and they decided to sit this year out. So that's where we're expecting some of the bump in enrollment. We should have the largest kindergarten class ever, hopefully this August.
I would just like, and I'm sure the other board members, I'd like to see some report come back to us about how many kids we never found, so that, if you can't find them somewhere, I just don't want to see, there's kids out there somewhere that are sitting at home, their parents are not making them come to school, and they're not engaged at all, so we're losing them totally. So I would feel more comfortable knowing that you guys looked, and these are the kids we can't find. Give us, the names of the kids that we know should be here, but we can't find them anywhere, so that we have some idea whether those kids, how many kids there are when you're all finished.
And I would just add, so when you get that list, my daughter's name would be on that list. Because again, I think our kindergarten classes, I met with the principals this morning, so the registrations for kindergarten roundup has been tremendous. And so my daughter would be on the list of kids that you don't have, and then she'll be on the registration list for this year.
I saw some hands, Mrs. Andrews and then Mrs. Whitfield. Dr. Robinson?
Thank you, and certainly the board members can help. We are on the ground in our communities, so I've heard this number about all these missing children for months, but I've never seen a list. So, Mr. Barbieri, I do concur. I would like to see what we have. I mean, Dr. Fennoy, yes, we'll know your daughter is taken care of, but there are a lot of children out there that their parents are keeping them home, or we don't know where they are. But if we go into these neighborhoods that we're walking the street, doing what we do every single day in our districts, we can help find these kids. And we have people that's out in our communities that can help us find these children. So, but I've just never seen that list. So this will be great now that we're talking about it, that we can see what we're talking about so we can help, because we want to get every kid back in school.
Mrs. Whitfield and Dr. Robinson, then Ms. McQuinn.
Well, I have a question about the actual slide that we're looking at, but since we're talking about missing children, I think one of the things that's about to come forward and be a really big problem and is going to be our homeless population, with the evictions becoming a real issue again. I think we're going to lose a lot of kids. They're not going to have anywhere to live. And so I think that's going to have to be a priority for next year as we go forward, really thinking about where these kids are, how we get them services, and how we prioritize that. So I hope our budget will reflect that. The question that I have on this, and please feel free to just tell me, that I'm missing something here. But so we have more children in an increase, but we are losing $51 million. So I see there's a big chunk, $46 million in the emergency order funding adjustment. But can you explain why is it that there's such a loss, even though there's more kids overall? I'm clearly missing something.
Right, so, that's why I was, this year was very unique in that we had the hold harmless. So initially, we're funded based on our projected enrollment. So that's what that second calculation is. So that very first column is our projected enrollment for this current year that we're in right now, FY21. And so we were projected to have 194,000 students, not only in our district, but not only our district operated schools, but charter schools and FES and McKay. We actually only had 186,900 students. But because of the hold harmless, we were being funded on $194,000 students. And so that's where we are right now, is 186,000 students. The projection for FY21 is we are actually going to see an increase in enrollment. So we're actually going to increase from where we are right now by 2,600 students. But it ends.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, Ms. Whitfield, I think you were on the right track. That $46 million you see, that was the one-time hold harmless, and that goes away.
Okay, that makes
so
sense.
that's a loss of $46 million right there. And then they did reduce the class size categorical.
Oh.
There was also this funding compression formula for last year that benefited us. We lost that. And as Ms. Canus is explaining, now we're saying, okay, we're going up 2,500, but that's from a reduced starting point of being down 8,000 kids. So it's hard to say.
That makes
We're
sense
going
now.
up basically from our reduced position, but we're
Okay,
still,
that
if you look
makes
year
sense.
over year, we're still down
And there was a
6,000
little
kids.
piece in here for the teacher classroom supply assistance. We took that away? Is that?
No,
Why
that's
did it
the
go
state
down?
program where each teacher gets, last year it was $320 per
And so-
teacher. and
But
that's-
that looks like it went down almost $50,000. Why, how did
And
that?
that's the allocation from the state. So this is a state categorical, it's allocated by the state. And so it would be, calculated based on what the actual enrollment is.
Enrollment is.
Yeah,
And
we'll
what funding is available to.
Okay, so it didn't change, it's just the
Yeah.
number of kids.
No, but
Okay,
We have
thank
to
you.
reset each year based on the number of teachers, and it ranges from like $275 to $320, somewhere in that range.
Gotcha. Thank,
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So first on this page, and then I want to go back to the prior conversation. There's an asterisk next to DCD on line 6, and I can't figure out what the asterisk is for.
Last year we had that concern about the formula changing. I don't know if I left an asterisk behind, but
Okay.
do you know, Ms. Canoes? I think that might be, the DCD issue was settled. For a couple of years there, it was in flux, and we were concerned that they might reduce it, but that might be an errant asterisk that I forgot to take out.
Okay, thank you. So just to go back to the finding children conversation, so would you look at the details and the fine print of the ESSER money? Because, see, I think we need to find more than K through 12. I'm on this thing trying to find funding to have people knock on doors and find 3- and 4-year-olds. Now, we can find K through 12 at the same time, but I think, I really, because I believe in the importance of early education, I'm trying to find those 3- and 4-year-olds. So I'm wondering if we could use some of that money for that. And then the other thing is, if we can use any of that money to retrieve dropouts or young people who have graduated, but we want to bring them back into some of our career adult education. Can we use, I just want to know the rules. You can send us a memo or whatever, but I want to expand past the K-12, and which I know is important for the funding, but I want to talk about education and saving lives, and so I kind of want to expand the thought there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're waiting for a webinar from FDOE on the specific requirements around those dollars, so we'll try to get those questions answered.
Mrs. McQuinn?
We haven't addressed, I don't think, the fact, a memo came from Mr. Burke, speaking to him through the superintendent, that you have allocated money for staff members from each school to reach out, correct? And that's happening now? Right.
Yes,
so-
that is correct. It was just under $200,000 district-wide, so it was a relatively modest amount, but yes, that's going on right now.
Okay, because I do agree with that the parents are going to respond more quickly to a school employee. And just paying them a little bit of money for that is at least acknowledging what they're doing to try to get the students. And I hope that the data comes back to us by school. Thank you.
Ms. Ayala?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Burke and the deputy. On the second slide, on line 30, under local funding, it says the 2.76% increase. So I was wondering, what's the dollar value of that approximately?
So that's the Palm Beach County tax roll. The projection is that it would go up 6.1 billion. So the current tax roll is about 222 billion, and it would go up to 228 billion. We're not sure about that. We'll get an estimate on June 1st, and then we get the certified tax roll after July 1st. And it's possible it may grow more than that. I know Ms. Brill has shared, the housing market's red hot. And we're hoping that this is a modest, estimate, but this is what the state utilized. And we'll just continue to monitor that. It's possible we could be back at, in the 5% ballpark, which will benefit us with our discretionary millage and our 1 mil referendum. The RLE, while it's not being rolled back, when the legislature approves the budget, they approve a fixed dollar amount. So if the tax roll exceeds expectations, they just reduce that tax rate. So the RLE would be reduced, and we wouldn't necessarily see the full benefit of exceeding the projection.
Got it. Just one quick follow-up. I agree that I think that's a low estimate, and hopefully we'll be in a good place. But just curious what that translated to, because since that fund can be used for other things we'll need it for if we do end up lucking out. Thank you.
Good point.
Ms. Brew?
Thank you, and I was just going to say that I'm glad you're being more conservative with regard to the tax roll, because while prices right now, the real estate market is very hot, prices are crazy high, the supply isn't there. So we're seeing a huge increase in price, but the supply is drying up, and it's drying up very quickly, much more so than ever. So I think maintaining a conservative approach is really, worthwhile. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I know that we touched on some of these, but I think it's important for me to just make sure to highlight them. And going back to the slide 4 that I was on, the funding compression and hold harmless, that was a brand new categorical in FY21. We did not plan for that money to be recurring. We didn't think that we would get that categorical again this year, and we did not. It's related to a calculation within the DCD. And so the benefit of us not including that in the regular budget, we had set that aside as one-time, non-recurring. So in looking at our budget shortfall, we can back that out because it's not something that we built into the budget as a recurring increase. So it will help to reduce our shortfall. And then in terms of the hold harmless, the difference between, the 194,000 students and the 186,000 students, the value of those students equated to $46 million. So that's how much more money we received from the Florida Department of Education than we actually generated based on our enrollment. And in looking at, we already talked about the tax roll. So right now the tax roll is set to have a 2.76% increase. We do believe that is conservative. So we are hopeful that we will see an increase once that's actually certified. We do expect to see an increase in enrollment in both charter schools and McKay and Family Empowerment Scholarship. And once you take all of that into consideration, we're looking at a loss in our district of $32 million. And that funding equates to, that per student funding equates to a loss of $27 per student. If you remember when we were looking at statewide, there was actually a slight increase of $30 per student, but because of the loss of the funding compression, as well as the loss in the class size reduction, we're looking at a loss of $30, nearly $30 per student.
Ms. Knus, let me ask
Yes.
you a question. So I thought Mr. Burke said that 2.76%, the legislature's already set it, so if it comes in higher than that, we don't get the money anyway. Did I misunderstand?
But we will for the referendum.
Yeah, we get it on certain revenue. Like, we do not get it on the required local effort, which is, the big chunk there, $800 million or $817 million. That will not change. But the discretionary funds, the .748 mils, which is expected to bring in $163.8 million there on line 32, that will increase if the tax roll goes up.
Okay.
And if our capital millage, the 1.5 mils, that'll increase as well, and along with the 1 mil referendum.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
So yeah, we don't get the full benefit, but we see some of it.
Okay. Any other questions?
Because I know there's a lot of information and numbers on those two slides. And this year is just more confusing because of the hold harmless issue. So if those slides are always confusing, and that just added a whole another level of complexity. So we are looking at a shortfall, and a lot of that has to do primarily with the declining enrollment. So in addition to that, we had the approval of the voucher program within the state legislature, so that is going to have an impact as well, and that is unknown as to what that's going to look like and what the impact is going to be. We already talked about the legislative increase in FRS. That equates to $8 million in our district, and FPL is proposing a rate increase, and if that gets approved, we would be looking at almost a $4 million increase in our electricity costs just in next year. And so we also have the outstanding issue with the charter school lawsuit, and having to set aside $25 million pending the ultimate outcome of that case. So in looking at our ESSER funds, it's still not finalized, so it's still in flux. We know how much money we're going to receive, but we're still waiting on guidance from the Florida Department of Education. We were supposed to have a webinar this week. We thought it was going to be this week, so if it's most likely will be coming up soon, because we do need to have a timeline and know what information is going to have to be submitted, how we're going to have to apply for it, and the timeline of when we're actually going to be receiving the funding. So looking at the ESSER 1 funds, that's already been fully expended. We've already drawn down the funds. The only thing that's still open is some charter school reimbursements. So looking at the ESSER 2 funds, there are some legislative mandates that have been set aside for those funds. And then for ESSER 3, there's some federal mandates on how those funds can be utilized. So in looking at the ESSER 2 dollars, this was what, a big discussion that we had this evening. $6.1 million of ESSER 2, it has been set aside by the state legislature to focus on locating those missing students and trying to re-engage them. $30.6 million is to address the learning loss, and $7.7 million is for technology and services related to technology and making sure that students have access. There is a portion of that money that is going to be allowed to be used in FY21. We don't know how much that is going to be yet, and so we're still waiting on official guidance from DOE. And whatever the difference is going to require a detailed spending plan. We don't know exactly what that detailed spending plan is going to entail, and when it's going to have to be submitted. So we're waiting on guidance for that. But those are all legislative mandates that were passed during this session. And in looking at the ESSER 3 dollars, 20% of that has to be spent on remediating the learning loss, and then the remaining amount, on allowable activities. So that was going to be the focus of the ESSER funds anyway, but that was just, making sure from at a federal and state level that it is being earmarked and at least a certain percentage is being used for those initiatives. And so the ESSER dollars, receiving over $500 million, it is daunting. It is a lot of money, and we have to make sure that we're being very transparent, strategic, and thoughtful in how we utilize those funds. And we need to plan for what that funding cliff is going to look like to ensure that we're using those funds for initiatives that are going to be sustainable, that we're building capacity. So we're focusing on the learning loss, the social emotional needs of the students, all the initiatives that you have been speaking about this evening.
Ms. Knus, Mr. Superintendent, the board will obviously have oversight on how this money is going to be spent. It's not, I know that the district is working on a lot of different programs, but are we going to get to see how the dollars are being broken up?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So, it's similar to the work that you're doing with your strategic plan. We need to develop an ESSER plan, and there should be a lot of consistency between those two things and the priorities that you're getting all that feedback from people. But what I envisioned is, yes, we would have the board take a separate vote on this ESSER plan and bring that in tandem with the tentative budget in late July, which that aligns with the timeline that Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield have shared with you as far as developing that. It's a SASB plan. We've also called it, as far as the student supports. So that's the work ahead of us over the next couple of months, is to develop, I want to go ahead and do a 3-year plan to show, how we're going to use these dollars for FY22 through 24, and, and also knowingly that they're going to be gone in FY25, and what's our strategy to live without the money when it sunsets. So yes, that's what, there's a lot of work going on in this area. With the Council of Great City Schools, they're putting out different guidance documents every week, and we're building that plan. But as Ms. Knus said, we've never had this type of money to work with. So we're thinking bigger than we ever have, and it's a little scary too, because you don't want to, mess up a good thing here. So we want to bring you a really well thought out plan, and along the way, we've got to capture some of that same community input, like you're doing with your strategic plan. So I'm gonna talk to Mr. Tierney and Ms. Valencio about tag team and maybe adding our ESSER plans to that agenda.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I think it's important for all of us to recognize that even when we bring the initial plan, Council of Great City Schools, all the organizations I'm a part of are saying, don't rush to build this massive plan now, because we don't, part of what we have to do is we're going to get through the summer. And a lot of next year, we'll actually be ramping up for, as we understand who our kids are. So I think the plan that we present this summer, and Dr. Sheffield and Mr. Oswald and others have talked about this, we're going to be bringing back different iterations of the plan as we all discover what is actually working. So I want all of us to be clear, when we come forward in July, it won't be the total plan for 3 years, but it'll have elements of the buckets and the directions that we'll be going. I think being aligned to the strategic plan only makes sense because the level of accountability with these dollars is going to be something we've never seen before. And I think we're going to have to, we've already talked to the Inspector General. I mean, there's a lot of oversight, quarterly reviews, and so the board is going to, there's going to be a lot of intimate conversations because we're going to have to account for every single dollar.
Mrs. Andrews?
And I thank you, Mr. Burke, for all the hard work you're doing with the Council of Great City Schools. Well, I'm sitting on the Friday meetings too, and you're right on the money that there is going to be a portion where that community involvement has to be in place. But the council is actually putting together a format for board members as well as for administration. So I would like for you all to watch out because we've been working on it, and so it will give you some guidance, even though it doesn't tell you how you're going to spend your money, but it's going to give you some ideas and some footprints on what kinds of things that these big urban school districts are thinking about and how they're looking at where they're going to spend their monies. Certainly, we're not in a rush right now, but you kind of need to look at what's going on at a national level, and that's what Mr. Burke is a part of from the finance piece of the council. But they're building a plan for superintendents and administration as well as one for school board members. So would you look out for that as it comes through? That's going to be very helpful for you.
We actually got the first one today. I got it from Mike Cashley today. The board, I don't have the board one, but the one for superintendents and staff, I already have that.
Okay, good.
Okay, so in looking at the forecast, so right now, taking into consideration where we are with our revenue, the increase in the expenses that we already talked about, like increase in FRS, taking into consideration the realignment of the school-based staffing based on enrollment, we are looking at a projected shortfall of $27.5 million. But know that that is primarily due to declining enrollment. And with the uncertainties surrounding enrollment, we're going to continue to monitor, and we're going to bring back to the board a balanced budget as we are required to do. At the same time, also working on the multi-year spending plan, ESSER plan as well.
Right, and that just breaks down to a little less than $4 million per board member. So we appreciate your help, and we'll be working. We've got some ideas, and I think when we shore up the operating budget for some of the expenses we had related to COVID that now we have the federal money available for, that'll hopefully bridge the gap. Tax roll comes in a little bit higher, that'll help. So anyway, we'll be back in June with a tighter forecast and hopefully some recommendations to get closer to balanced.
Mr. Burke, where was the $4 million last year if we're down $4 million each board member this year?
I was thinking, quick math, 28 million divided by 7. So I can't remember how much you guys came up with last year. We'll go check.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then we also did make reductions in this current school year as well, like Mr. Burke had mentioned, within departments as well as schools. And, with the state holding us harmless, that is going to help with savings in the current year as well, which can help to offset. And so our budget really does line very closely with the student academic support plan. And so there was the last presentation in April. The next presentation will be in July, which will align with, showing you a start of what the plan is going to look like for spending of those ESSER dollars, since the ESSER dollars are going to be the primary funding source of that student academic support plan. So we are going to have a budget advisory committee meeting tomorrow. They're going to be hearing the exact same presentation today. I was hopeful that we would have gotten more information on those ESSER funds and the application process to be able to present to the Budget Advisory Committee, but unfortunately we did not get that. But our next budget workshop and Budget Advisory Committee will be in June, We have our tentative budget adoption July 28th, and final budget adoption is September 14th. And so are there any other questions from the board members?
Dr. Robinson?
So I have a question or a comment that's not exactly a budget, but on whichever page this is, you made note that in the state budget, it deletes the requirement for providing an extra hour of reading per day for the low 300. And so I know we had a student academic support plan. I think I would just like follow up later that our CAO and deputy were, and whoever else worked on that plan, teaching and learning, whoever, that they were conscious that this might have happened, because it didn't happen before we looked at the plan. And so, you know, historically, we've done that whack-a-mole thing, right?
So,
And, yeah,
yeah, this was an 11th hour amendment to, I think, the charter school bill, where it kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. It happened right before the vote on, or before they finalized the budget. It doesn't mean we necessarily do away with that program, but I think as we develop the SASB and the ESSER plans, we need to say, okay, is that additional instruction, if it's providing value, is it something we want to continue through the ESSER dollars, or do we let go of it and do something differently? But we haven't even, we have to have that conversation.
Okay,
And
so-
you know, Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield just learned of this recently, and we were all caught off guard.
okay, so, well, thank you for that. So, yeah, so I just want to make sure that we don't miss that. Like, so we were providing this additional support for some schools, right? It's now no longer being mandated by the state. Now, I don't particularly think it was effective, and I'm going to look at some reports about that, but I just want to know that we are aware that, and maybe that student academic support plan needs to be tweaked with that in mind. So that's my only thing, because you know me, I think reading is what? Fundamental. And I want to make sure that we are not going to slide at all backwards on developing these foundational reading skills. Thank you.
We're spending about $5 million to support that program, so if we stop it, then that's potentially money to help balance the budget or do something different. It's, what?
Mr. Burke always trying to take the money to balance the budget. Do that again.
Well,
Say
no,
that
I'm just
again.
saying that right now, it's to provide that low 300, the extra instructional time is about $5 million a year. And so the requirement's gone.
Right.
So, I mean, it's either potential savings or it's another, or you keep it going locally and say, hey, we think it's such a great program, we're going to just keep it going,
Right.
or we do something different. But
Right.
I think all that, you know, all that feeds into the same conversation about how do we want to use the federal dollars going forward.
Okay.
And
Okay,
'cause
so in
extended
my
learning
world-
time is a common theme you're going to see across the country. And it's-
Okay.
And that's a debate, right? Is it better to have more time, or is it better to have more intense instruction with fewer students?
Well, since we're talking about the budget, then my request is that Mr. Burke holds some money in escrow for Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield to figure out what we're gonna do about that. Because I'm just saying, the money should be driven by what we need to do academically. And so now this piece of support is disappearing. So just, you know, make sure you don't, just set that aside, please.
There's also, within the federal dollars, though, it's-
Mike, now let me respond to that. So
Maybe I'm talking too
we
much.
haven't yet decided that it's disappearing. I think that's really what the fundamental, we haven't, it's so new to us, we don't know what. And so between the ESSER money, I'm sure the team is going to come up with a solution, but we have not made that decision to let it go yet.
and one thing we have to guard against, the federal dollars, the ARP, the rescue plan dollars, or ESSER 3, includes a maintenance of equity requirement, so that you cannot to strip resources away from your low, you know, your highest need schools. And you have to be careful that you don't give the lower need schools an inordinate amount of resources so that you create inequity there, right? So we're going to have to be mindful, and that's part of that puzzle. If you pull away the low 300, then have we just lost maintenance of equity? So there's a lot to look at.
Lots and lots.
Well, I think may have wrapped it up.
Thank you both. Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thank you,
your
Mr. Berg. At
patience.
this